Welcome, friends of the show. Thanks for tuning in today. This is the Max Schmarzo podcast. My podcast voice is out today. We're going to have a couple of topics here, a couple of fun topics. The two primary topics where we're going to start with and where we might end with, it depends how much time we take. Numero uno is going to be about the philosophical meaning of math. Yeah, I know. Doesn't that sound weird? The philosophical meaning of math, of whether or not we discovered math, and what does that mean philosophically? Something kind of interesting, cool to talk about. I think it's fun, neat, and I think you might like it too, which is why I'm sharing it with you all here. And then number two, what other podcast are you going to find that is going to pair the philosophy of math with number two, that is programming heavy singles into your training? What a mix. I might award myself the the prize, the high accolades of the only person to ever mix these two together. I don't know, maybe not. I'd be willing to bet. I think about that sometimes. Like, am I the only person in the world to have ever done something? Like, am I the only person in the world to have ever made a video talking about doing heavy singles in training and the philosophical meaning of math? Like, how many times in life do you actually do something that you're the only person to have ever done something? Like, I'm not the only person to have ever eaten a cheeseburger. Like, sometimes I'll be working out and I'll play a song and I wonder, am I the only person in this world listening to this song right now? Is it like I grew up in the Bay Area. And you guys might know some of the music. You might not. So whatever, specific Bay Area rap. And I was listening to it at like 9:30 a.m. or 7:30 a.m. I'm like, I wonder if I'm the only person in the world right now listening to this rap. And you know what? You listening to this, you might be the only person in the world listening to this podcast at the moment. That's kind of a cool concept. There's lots of people in this world. And for you to be doing something so unique, millions of people are watching TV, but for you to be doing something where you're the only one doing it, it's kind of a cool idea. So think about that. That's a way to, get the brain churning here today. Think about how many times you're doing something during a day that you might be the only person doing that, or the only person to have ever done that. That's another cool thing to think about. Am I the only person to have ever listened to this song in Iowa or whatever it might be at 7:30 a.m.? Possibly. I could be the first and only to have ever done that. Interesting. Well, now we're kind of talking about weird things. Let's just hop right into the math. So I heard this. This is not my original idea, but it was an idea. I'm not sure where I heard it from first, but it resonated with me. I found it really interesting. The idea that math was either developed or discovered. I don't know who I heard talk about it first, and I'd be probably wrong if I try to credit with someone with it, because I'm sure whoever talked about it, who I heard it from, didn't talk about it first themselves. But it's the idea. Let's just have an example. Remember Pythagoras' theorem, the old triangle thing? You guys remember in geometry class, sophomore year in high school, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And no matter how you twist it, we're solving for the hypotenuse here. That is c squared. A squared plus b squared always equals c squared. And so regardless of whether or not you understood the math, like you understood the reason why a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the two sides equal the length of the hypotenuse if you square them all. Whether or not you understood why that exists, it existed prior to its discovery. Like, math and the constants of math exist whether or not we understand the constants of math. And I think philosophically that's pretty interesting, because it makes you wonder how many things out there in this world that are constants that exist, we have yet to discover. Because I think a lot of times people think about math, geometry, physics, chemistry, things of that nature to be something that we discover. It's not necessarily a creation in the way that creating a computer program to a video game, the video game would never have existed if it wasn't for the creator of that video game. But the fundamental laws of physics or the math behind Pythagoras' theorem is a constant regardless. It is a constant in which the environment we operate in the same way, if someone were to have made a program for a computer game and they would have to program specific constraints in the computer game, and the computer game had a software and those people in the computer world had to operate by those constraints, whether or not they had discovered those constraints, they existed. In the same way, we are in our environment and we have these mathematical constants that exist that we operate in and limit us whether or not we have understood it. So it's almost like math is the process of discovery. I found that to be really interesting because it not only gave me a lot more appreciation for math, and I think I'm not a big numbers guy. I'm kind of a numbers guy. I'm not. And I've always not given much credit to numbers, but the idea that there is some philosophical like undertone to numbers is pretty interesting to me. And it makes you think quite a bit. It makes you wonder what else is out there that is a constant that we operate in our environment with and against and through and between and whatever that we haven't discovered yet. I think having that creative whimsy or imagination is so unbelievably important. I think a lot of people won't grasp, or they don't grasp, the philosophical intrigue that comes with the fact whether or not math was discovered or not. Because I think a lot of times people don't allow their imagination to kind of let their imagination go to work, because it is an interesting concept. And you might imagine things that are far-fetched and aren't true, but I think having that imagination and talking about imagination and math, what a weird mix. But they are tied together, which I think, again, is so unique because it does bring about like that philosophical idea. So what does that mean? What does it mean that we have certain constants that exist, that we have discovered, that we have not discovered, that allow us to operate more efficiently in our environment? We know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if we're going to build a triangle, I'm not sure. This is a right triangle, right? I am not like the world's smartest human being. It's a right triangle. Isn't that Pythagoras' theorem? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's not just any old triangle because the hypotenuse only happens in a right triangle. I think I'm right. I'm pretty positive I'm right. So the point is, if you're trying to build a right triangle, which for whatever reason you're building a right triangle, a ramp of some sort, a ramp is fairly common, and that ramp is going to be a right triangle of a ramp, well, then you understand how to more efficiently make that ramp without having to just rely on trial and error, right? Certain math and mathematical principles make us more efficient inside of our environment because we're not just relying on constant trial and error, but instead we have guidelines and rules through which we can operate in, build, create, change, and modify. Pretty cool concept. I'll leave it there for now. I don't really have much else to share on that topic other than I want you to think about it, ponder it. What are things out there that we don't always appreciate? And what are the meaning of it? Like as a little kid doing math, 2 + 2 = 4. It's kind of like whatever. But the fact that 2 + 2 always equals 4 is kind of an interesting concept. You have to have an open mind for that. So maybe some of you are listening to this like, this is the stupidest stuff I've ever heard. And that's okay. I think it's kind of cool. I think it's interesting. So that's that. We'll go on to the fun stuff here. Programming heavy singles. Big transition, sharp turn left, sharp turn right, immediately right into training, the constant of training, right? So let's get into it. Training, talking about heavy singles, why I like to use heavy singles, how I like to use them, and specifically what I do after them. So first off, what is a heavy single? It varies per person. For one person, it might be 80% of their 1 rep max. For another person, it might be 95 to 100. It depends on the exercise you're doing. If I'm doing a machine, like the machine that you're also familiar with, I might be more inclined to push that 1 rep max a little bit higher percentage-wise. Like I might push it towards that 95% world. Versus a barbell on a free weight squat, I'm less inclined. Reason why for that? Well, if you think about a barbell squat, let's just talk about a free squat. You're by yourself, you're doing a back squat. The closer you get to 100%, I just smacked myself with a microphone. If you guys heard that, I apologize if that was annoying your ear. The closer you get to 100% of your 1 rep max, the less repeatable the movement is, and the more perfect you have to be in your movement. In other words, the closer you get to 1 rep max, the more likely there is a failure in a single repetition. In a failure, what does a failure mean? Well, in the back squat, that's quite a large event. You have to properly dump the weight. You're pushing certain muscles to limiting aspects. Those muscles might not even be the muscles you're trying to train, blah, 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 so on and so forth. In other words, pushing yourself to a 1 rep max in a back squat probably has a higher risk of, I don't want to call it injury, of unfortunate failure, I'll call it, when you're doing it. But when you're doing it with a machine, or even a certain piece of equipment, maybe like a trap bar, if you've done it many times, the machine I use down in our basement for our lifting, that powerlift squat hybrid machine, those are great options because, especially the powerlift squat hybrid machine, if you get out of position, first off, the bar is going to move in one path and one path only. It's going to be moving along the path of the machine itself. So in a machine, I might have a certain fixed range of motion. So I'm doing the squat hybrid machine, and this fixed range of motion, some people claim, is a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing when you're going really heavy, because one of the reasons why you have unfortunate failures on the barbell back squat is the fact that it's not a fixed range of motion. It can go front, back, left, right, side to side. And with that, you have opportunities to miss your lift front, right, left, side to side, and not because your muscles were the limiting factor in terms of force production. The more fixed a movement becomes, the more I'm not going to miss a lift front and left, side to side, the more the muscles become a limiting factor. On top of that, the location of load, the fact maybe it's in my hands on a machine, if I get out of position, I can just let go. The weights can fall to the ground. I can focus on straining without being concerned that if I'm to deviate a pattern and get myself off balance, that I'm going to put myself in a position of risk because I can just simply let go. In a back squat, you're kind of in a pickle. A deadlift, you can always drop it, sure. Much easier. Back squat, you're kind of in a pickle. So when it comes to heavy lifts on a machine, there's certain hybrid machines, I'm more inclined to go a lot heavier. On a back squat, not as much. Just my take on that. Unless it's a barbell safety squat bar, I should say. And we got the hand assistance, and we got the athlete's been coached on it. Now you can get away with it because you can use hand assistance where you need to on certain positions, make sure center mass is lined up, all these wonderful things to add a little bit of stability. All those are great options. So the question is, why do I do a heavy single? Well, when it comes down to it, a heavy single, in my opinion, is one of those rare exercises where you have huge amounts of volitional effort exerted. Now, you might have a lot of exertional efforts in a jump squat, a trap bar jump, a jump at all, whatever. I don't care. Hang clean. The time of volitional effort relative to the exertion amount without relaxation is very high. So you might take 3 seconds to do a max effort lift, while a jump might take 0.3 seconds. So the max exertion is actually 3 times longer on that squat without any rest in between. So it's a huge amount of motor unit output and sustained motor unit output. And in theory, if the magnitude of motor unit output and the exposure to a magnitude of motor unit output, I guess in theory, right, we're just getting real theoretical here, plays a role in regards to motor unit recruitment as a whole and threshold lowering, it could be argued that doing a sustained volitional effort for 3 seconds and constant effort makes that effort and that activation pattern easier next time? Maybe. Well, you also have 3 seconds of high level tension, which is arguably one of the stimuli for strength gains. And as we know, maximal strength training does have benefits for explosive power outputs, strength gains in general. So that's where I like a single versus multiple reps, because we can focus our intent on that single, even if it's not 100%, if it's 85% or a double. I don't like to do these 5s and 4s, a double. we can really focus our efforts on those 2 reps to really get the most out of it we possibly can. So the tension is really important. And the tension that you feel after some of those lifts are one of those things you really need to consider, because those are high tension lifts. And anecdotally, I've had many athletes say something like this. After I do something like that, they might feel a very tonic response in the muscles, like a tightened response in the muscles that just lifted. So no, I'm not going to do a bunch of accessory work after that. What I want to do actually is some form of locomotion where we have to contract, relax in a rhythmic manner. And when we do something like that, I personally feel you essentially get rid of some of that excessive tonic tension that's residual from the lift. Now, I don't have any science behind it. I have no idea what to explain it as. It could be the fact that you just did a whole bunch of lifting on those muscles and those legs are tense for whatever reason. But when we go and run and do something rhythmic after, it seems to reduce the tension post lifting. And that tension's often unwanted. That tension I've seen mess up movement patterns, jump patterns, whatever patterns you might have. I've seen it firsthand. The athlete has themselves say like, look, I feel that same residual tension from the lift before. So I like to go for a walk, a jog, do some real light, low level plyos, do some band rhythmic work, but get the muscles pumping rhythmically. I have found to be helpful, purely anecdotal. So those are 2 big ones. Also, the number of times you can expose yourself to heavy doubles and singles is relative to the number of times you have done heavy doubles and singles. Someone who's not very well versed at it, that exertion takes a lot of effort. It's really demanding. Someone who becomes more used to it can probably do it a little more often. But that's just kind of based around the theory of the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. One of those adaptations might be special or specific work capacity, the capacity to just handle heavy loads. I think is really important. And considering that heavy loads put a lot of load on certain things, well, we need to find ways to reduce excessive loading. And that's where I tend to like certain single leg things. I do double leg ones, sure. But you can modify range of motion. You can do pin squats. I don't care if you do regular squats. I'm not against it. I'm just mentioning some modifications that you could add. If you have an athlete who's super duper duper strong, you're like, man, I don't want to put that much load on them. Or someone who you're not comfortable squatting through a specific range of motion, but they're not as super duper strong. Maybe doing a pin squat, maybe doing a hand supported squat, maybe doing the machine I'm using on a single leg. The point is finding modifications that make sense. There's not going to be one modification that fits every single person. That's just not true. But there are going to be modifications that fit some people better and others not as well. So finding ones that work. And that leads me to my last part about heavy singles. You don't just throw an athlete into an exercise and hope they can do a heavy single. It involves a lot of communication, discussion. How do you feel? What is your movement pattern like? Is the form correct? Are you going to videotape it to make sure the form is done right? Wonderful. The form is good. They feel comfortable with it. You've worked into heavy to moderate heavy loads prior to. Cool. They can do some heavy singles based on you and their communication with them. Again, it's not perfect every time. It just isn't. But there's certain situations where it might make sense for that individual. And lastly, I've kind of noticed that heavy singles, when done right, they don't yield so much soreness. Like I think a lot of the soreness comes from those moderate reps, like 8, 10 reps. And so it's a great way to get a lot of strength effort, to force a rest in between, great intent, a lot of mechanical and tension load without having some residual DOMs. So delayed onset muscle soreness. So I hope that makes sense. That's kind of my wrap on heavy singles. Not everyone needs to use them. Not everyone has to use them. That's okay. I'm not pro infinite number of uses of heavy singles. I'm just talking about a method I have used with athletes that I personally have used for myself, and that you might take some little small bit of that information and apply it in a way that makes sense for you. Don't train your athletes. Don't just take this information, try and run with it and apply it without considering the ramifications of you and your athletes. Always consider that. So as I promised last episode, by the way, that's me hard right here. Driving this podcast episode down a hill, apparently. Talking about my 3 favorite scenes in sport movies. Basketball scenes in non-basketball related movies. And I told you basically 1 and 2. I love Teen Wolf. Excellent. Well done. supreme basketball movie that's not basketball related. Number 2, oh man, I love this one. It's a Snake Pliskin one. Snake Pliskin escaped from LA. And I told you I was going to break it down for y'all. So what happens here, off the top of my head, I believe he has 10 seconds per shot. And if you've ever played basketball, it's like 10 seconds per shot. Otherwise, he's going to jail or he's being detained or something. I'm not really sure what it is. He's like in this like weird jail situation. He's in the Coliseum at USC, and he has to make 6 shots, I believe. And each time he makes a shot, the clock resets. And the guy, it's a free throw, it's a layup, a free throw, a 3-pointer, a half-court shot, maybe it's 5, and then a full court shot. But each time he makes the shot, he doesn't have to shoot those shots. That's just the progression of shots. So what happens, he starts off, he makes this layup. They used to run down the court in 10 seconds. And he can't get down the court in 10 seconds. My goodness, because Snake Pliskin's wearing too much leather and boots, I guess, to make it down there. He's weighed down, shoots a free throw, makes it, and then struggles to make it back. The 3-point line makes it, and the crowd's like, oh my gosh, no way. And then he makes a half-court shot and then proceeds to make his final shot with a full-court one-hand shot. It's unbelievable. It is by far the single best scenes in a non-basketball related movie. Teen Wolf as a whole just has the greatest highlights. Teen Wolf, he's out here dunking on people. He becomes a wolf in the middle of the game, which is awesome. They just keep playing. The guy who is the extra for the wolf could obviously handle the rock pretty well. Awesome. It's just unbelievable. I love it so much. It comes down the court, dunking on people left, dunking on people right, any which way that you can imagine, getting buckets. And it's just hilarious. You should check it out. Someone made an awesome video. It was like a hoop mixtape type video where it was Teen Wolf's highlights, top recruit in the nation. You should check that one out. So the Snake Pliskin, the Teen Wolf one. Number 3, I honestly let you all down because I told you I would have 3 on here, but there's not a third movie scene, in my opinion, that can equate to the beauty of those 2. I can't find one off the top of my head. Right now on top of my head, my research. Those 2 were the ones that really stood out. There are some other ones, like if you've ever watched, like there's some movies where they play basketball and like there's some good scenes in it, sure, but it's never as ridiculous as those 2 movies are. So I'm going to stick with those 2 just out of respect for the top 3, because normally when you say a top 3, like you're going to have like, oh my gosh, these are 3 great players, LeBron, Michael, and Kobe. I cannot put a third next to those 2. We have yet to have, in my opinion, until maybe I'm proven wrong. Someone messaged me like, Max, check this scene out. I'll update this, but I cannot put a third in the same breath as those 2. Snake Pliskin, Teen Wolf. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Just hilarious. Go check them out. That's all I have for the podcast today. I appreciate you guys as always. If you want to check out the Always an Athlete team, feel free to join the 7-day free trial. Probably should have done that at the beginning if anybody wanted to actually hear at this point. I mean, hear me talk about that. Blah, 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 blah. I can't even speak. Whatever. We're done here. I'm over it. Have a good day, y'all. Peace out. Hope you enjoy. Take care. As always, thanks for listening.